Hey everyone, it's Jordan Spangeburg here for Module 2, really focusing on the question of, are you ready? So lots of good things from this module, lots of good things from the reading, lots of good things from the video, things just to ponder and consider as, we all think about this whole idea of blended learning and what that potentially could look like in our classrooms, or what it already does look like, and what are some things that we could do differently. So the first thing from the video talks about 5 teaching shifts and just focusing on our overall readiness to embrace these things. So of those shifts, the first 2 that I want to focus on are things that I would consider pretty easy and again, things that I'm already doing in my classroom. So that's why I consider them some easier things. So the first one here, fixed groupings to dynamic groupings. And again, the video talked about, our groupings really need to exist by concept and be constantly changing. They shouldn't just be fixed groups that we put the students in at the beginning of the year and keep them the same thing the whole way through. And again, the video talked about things that we've probably done in our classrooms too. We can get them, any sort of creative or fancy name that we want, but usually it doesn't take our students long to figure out who's in what group and why. So again, it's really important that, our groupings are dynamic. And the video also talked about, again, that groups should be changing often, and all of that should be based on data that we're collecting in our classroom, through assessment. And the video talked about, these groups could even be changing daily, or at least on a weekly basis. So that's something I think that I'm easily doing in my room already. Again, using assessment, I definitely would not say I'm doing it on a weekly or even daily basis, but definitely by a concept basis. Being a math teacher, generally it adjusts and changes chapter by chapter as we go through our year. And the second thing that the video talked about that I think is an easy one that I can embrace is the whole idea of our shift in focus from a content focus to a content, skills, and mindset focus. And one of those big things here is the mindset piece I wanted to focus on. And we're really big in our district just having that growth mindset. Always looking at things through that lens, through that perspective, and just focusing on growth and just ways that we can just improve ourselves as learners and just as thinkers as well. And the 2 things the video hit on here for this one, first thing, it frees up time for mindset and skills. Again, not necessarily focusing just on content. And also frees up some time then for one-on-one check-ins, just making sure we're checking in with every individual student, not leaving anybody behind, making sure everybody is comfortable in terms of what we're learning and how they're learning it, and making progress. So from that video then, the 3 other pieces they talked about, and I identified these things as difficult for me. So the first one, having that whole mindset of from a lecturer to a facilitator. So I teach 5th grade, so I don't necessarily do a whole ton of lecturing, but my teaching styles can be that of one where I'm up in front of the room, teaching to the students. But the video, really focused on the fact that we sometimes need to take on the role of just being a facilitator instead. So the one thing the video, talked about that I would find really difficult in my classroom would be we as teachers, we're not necessarily answering the questions of the kids, but we're just proctoring the content and we're keeping them on task. So for me as a teacher, that'd be a tough one. And I think for the students, until they got used to that whole idea of how we do things, not being able to answer their questions as a teacher is just something for me that, I think would be difficult. Because of course, naturally we want our students to be successful. We want to be able to be the ones that answer the questions for them to help them move on. So that's the first thing I identified for me that would be really difficult. Also, the second one, shifting from an explainer to an intervener. And again, for that one, the video focused on we as teachers need to be explaining less up front and then intervening as soon as possible. And again, having that one-on-one time. So for me, again, that would be another difficult one because a lot of times for my math class, just with my teaching style, you like to explain everything to the kids up front. Talk to them about everything they'll need to know, and then send them off into their groupings or into their small groups and further the instruction or further the skills and things like that. So again, shifting from talking less as an explainer and just shifting to more of that intervener mode. And finally, the third one that I would find difficult, just thinking about the way that our school is set up, is shifting from the generalist to a specialist. So Some of the examples they gave, again, for focusing on specialties for teachers would be teachers that specialize in lesson planning, teachers that specialize in lecturing, teachers that specialize in the data and assessment, all of that collection, just bringing it all together. Again, I think all good things and all positive things that schools and teams of teachers should look at using, but at the same time, in order to do that, it really would take a lot of planning, a lot of collaboration, way more than I think we as teachers probably do on a day-to-day basis with our team of teachers, and also giving up some of that control in your classroom, which for me personally, just something that I would just find extremely difficult. But at the same time, the video did point out that shifting to that role of generalist to specialists, again, it frees up more time for you to focus on what you're really good at, and then sharing it amongst your colleagues and amongst your peers, and using it either school-wide or even district-wide. From there, then we went into the readings and just identifying a couple of things here as we look at the whole blended learning shift in our classrooms. So the first one that I pulled out from the readings is student ownership, and a couple of things here that I wanted to point out were the ownership, where it talks about students having input into content, pace, and structure. And again, for me, I would just find that a little bit challenging, giving up that control, especially with the pacing part. As a math teacher, at the beginning of the year, you look at all of the skills and content and areas that you have to get through in a year, and you pace it out. And after you do it for a couple of years, you kind of have a general idea of how long things should take, and how you can get through the whole year and cover everything that the students are supposed to learn. But again, giving up some of that control to students, is something that we as educators need to be looking at and considering in the blended learning model. Second one talked about, answering the question of why, not the what. So, we would explain how the instructional practices would benefit the classroom and the learners. And for that one, I think it's really big where students really need to buy into that. And, for me, I teach fifth graders, so parents essentially would need to buy in as well, since you're working with a little bit of a younger age group here in my classroom. And again, it might be one of those things where at the beginning it doesn't run as smooth, there's not as much buy-in, students aren't used to it, but it's one of those things where as the year progresses and students get more used to how we're learning and why we're doing it that way in the classroom, it's one of those things I think as the year progresses it'll flow smoother, and students become more comfortable with it. Hands-on learning, third thing here. Giving students time just to play with new technology, especially in the blended learning model. You're focusing a lot of the time on technology, and sometimes the technology is the piece that's doing the teaching if the students aren't necessarily in a small group working with you. And again, for me as a teacher, it's challenging to give up that control, if you will, giving students that freedom. Just thinking about working with 10, 11, 12-year-olds, sometimes letting them play with technology goes down the wrong trail, and students end up on apps they shouldn't be on, or just doing things they shouldn't be doing. So a lot of that, is teaching them, to be good digital citizens, having a positive learning environment, having good classroom management skills. But again, just giving students time to play. Fourth thing here, I just simply called a new vision. So, the whole idea of personalized and flexible learning environments, looking at real-time data, observations, interacting with students, getting feedback from students, all good things. And again, the note I put here just for the challenge, doing all of that in the classroom, it's a lot to manage, and it can be very time consuming. And we as teachers are sometimes so focused on, time and what do we get through, and how long is this going to take, and, I have to get through all of this by a certain time in the school year. So, we need to move on. And, but again, just stepping back and reflecting and just having that new mindset, looking at that new vision, as a teacher, and the role that we will play in the blended learning in our classroom. So again, just stepping back and just reflecting and being able to use all of these things in our room to really help the students as learners. And the final thing I wanted to highlight here, the whole idea of just transparency. So with that one, just being able to openly share successes and failures and look at positives and negatives, and helping others to have that same mindset and have that same idea. And again, for that one, the focus on here is for students again. For some students, it's really challenging for them to open up. They don't want to share things, whether they're positive or negative. They just don't want to share. And again, for this one, I think it just goes back to the whole idea of students buying in and just, having this new vision of what the classroom will look like. And again, I think as they get more comfortable with the classroom, with the students in the classroom, with me as the teacher, it's one of those things where they will become more transparent, as we build relationships with them and as the school year progresses, and they will be willing to open up more and share about things that are going really well and things that are not going well, and how we can help others look at those things again, like I said, objectively, and just helping everyone succeed the best they can. So again, lots of really good things in this module as we continue to look at the blended learning model and how we might use that in a classroom. So I look forward to the feedback, look forward to the discussions, and I look forward to working with all of you.